talking about vestibular disorders. It's a bit of a complicated subject, but it is one that physical therapists are very much involved with. It's a newer area for physical therapists to be involved with, working with people with vestibular disorders. So for the past 2.5 decades, physical therapists have become key practitioners in the management of the dizzy patient, following evidence that customized exercise programs were able to facilitate recovery following vestibular pathology. So this quote indicates it's a newer area for us as physical therapists to get involved with. So here's your objectives. In the next 15 minutes, I'm just going to concentrate on these first 2 objectives. And I want you to, again, this is a very complicated area, so I want you to just get the gist of it. Okay, so key components, basic vestibular physiology. Okay, you'll be getting much more of this in neuroscience in the fall. And then again, when I teach you guys neuromuscular patient management, your second year, and we'll be talking more about the management aspects. Because of studies like this one that show clearly that physical therapists and the kinds of things we do with people with vestibular disorders can make a difference, it's become more popular for having people involved with working with people with vestibular pathology. So this study looked at subjects, 32 adults with vestibular dysfunction. Half of them received typical physical therapy for strength and endurance. The other ones received individualized vestibular rehab programs, and those that had the individualized vestibular rehab programs showed significant benefits. So there's been many more, even randomized controlled trials, systematic reviews of randomized controlled trials, so we know that we can make an effect in people with vestibular disorders. So here's the part about vestibular anatomy and physiology. So the various functions of the vestibular system, in order to tell you about disorders, I have to tell you a little bit about the basic anatomy and physiology. So there's basically 3 different functions for our vestibular system. One of them is gaze stability, and that involves our vestibular ocular reflex, the VOR. So I want you to try something for me. Put your eyes on something in the back of the room or a person's head in front of you and shake your head all different directions. You can still look at that, right? Or if you can find something to read, my slide, while you do all that, you can still keep your eye on that letter, right? Yeah. Pretty amazing, right? That's our nervous system is just amazing. So that's one of the things that our vestibular system does, is this vestibular ocular reflex. And we'll be talking more details about that in a little bit, but that's one of the main functions of the vestibular system, is to allow us to still keep our focus when our head's moving around. Think about, cavemen running to chase animals. They're running fast, they're moving their head around, they're looking around, but they can keep their focus on that animal. You guys can read, in the subway or, in the car, whatever you have to do in order to keep up with your subjects, right? Because of the vestibular ocular reflex. Another thing that this system does is it senses and perceives motion. We'll be talking about the semicircular canals and these other organs called the otolith organs, and they tell us about all different directions of movement. So they let us know when we're moving. Now the vestibular system works very closely with the somatosensory system as well as the visual system. So we have vision, we have our senses like proprioception, kinesthesia, tactile sensations that tell us where we are in space. Vision tells us where we are in space. And vestibular, through this complicated mechanism in the inner ear, all these different hair cells that tell us where we are in space. So because we're able to sense and perceive motion in part because of the vestibular system. And the vestibular system is the one that is the kind of the judge. So say, has this ever happened to you? You're sitting in a parking lot and a person next to you backs up and you're immediately starting to put your brake on. Eventually you realize you aren't moving, okay? Your vision tells you you're moving. It absolutely is telling you you're moving. Your somatosensory is saying, no, you're not moving. It's your vestibular that tells you that it's okay, you're not moving. It breaks the tie, okay? So situations like that, the vestibular system is really important. And then the third thing is which is related to our balance system, the postural control system. So those connections with the vestibular tell us where we are in space, and then connects to our muscles and allows us to have muscle control so we don't lose our balance. So the balance aspects of the inner ear are the third function of the vestibular system. So gaze stability, sensing and perceiving motion, and then postural control. The different components of the vestibular system are the peripheral sensory apparatus, the membranous and bony labyrinths. So we have the semicircular canals, and we have the otolith organs. I'm going to talk about those in detail, and they have membranous components, and that's where the hair cells act in order to tell us where we are in space. There's also the central processor. It would be the midbrain and the pons section, brainstem and midbrain section of the brain, the central nervous system, where this information comes together. Okay, all of the information from the various vestibular organs comes into the brainstem area, and particularly the midbrain area of the central nervous system. And then finally, there's an output. Part of that is the vestibular spinal reflex, but other efferent motor pathways that act on what the information is brought in through the vestibular and the central processor. So things can go wrong when we get to that point. Things can go wrong at any of these levels, either the peripheral level, the central level, or there can be a problem with the spinal reflexes that we aren't able to take advantage of the vestibular information. Okay, so on to talking about the different bony parts, or the peripheral sensory apparatus. We have the bony labyrinth and the membranous labyrinth. So you've probably seen a picture of the inner ear, and there's 3 different circles. So here is, this is the cochlea, which comes through the vestibular cochlear nerve, and that's where our hearing information is taken in. And this part of the same apparatus is the vestibular section. Okay, so we have 3 semicircular canals here. And at the end of each of them is an ampulla, a swelling, where the membranous part is, okay? I'll tell you about that in a minute. And then there's also the otolith organs, the saccule and the utricle, that are here that also have this membranous organ. So we have 3 semicircular canals. In the semicircular canals are perilymphatic fluid, which is very similar to cerebrospinal fluid. And I can give you a fun example of that. Like, this would never happen to you, but if you ever had too much to drink and you have that spinning feeling, what happens is the composition of the cerebrospinal fluid changes ever so slightly, not a lot, but a little bit, enough that it's moving and is therefore deflecting the hair cells, and that's what makes you feel like you get dizzy. Okay, so the semicircular canals contain this perilymphatic fluid, and also the utricle and saccule contain this membranous portion. So there's 3 semicircular canals, and then membranous portions of all 3 of these, as well as the utricle and saccule. And in there is the endolymph, which is a little bit different than the paralymph. And there's usually not a connection between the 2. So the semicircular canals each contain a membranous portion. The utricle and the saccule also contain a membranous portion. So there it is again, the 3 semicircular canals. They're each in a different direction, and that's important. And here's the ampullas at the end that has the membranous structure, and then the utricle and saccule, which also contain membranous fluid. So here's what it would look like in the ear. It's very tiny, right? It fits inside your inner ear. Very, very small, but you can see the direction of each of these semicircular canals. So each one is a little bit different. So this is correct. The way it's placed inside the inner ear is true to form in this one. And you can see the utricle and saccule as well. So the semicircular canals are what detects angular rotation and responds to angular acceleration. So when we spin, it's the semicircular canals that are picking up that motion. Each semicircular canal widens at the end to form that ampulla, and inside that, the hair cells rest in the crista ampullaris. And again, in that ampulla is that membranous with endolymph in it. and it has slightly greater density than water. The alignment of the two semicircular canals, I think I have some pictures of that, are such that each one has a mate. So this direction is copied by this direction, so you can see that each, with a pair of semicircular canals, the posterior and the posterior, the superior and the superior, the anterior and the anterior, they line up. So it's really it's a lot of the comparing of the two sides in order to figure out where you are in space. And that, obviously this happens really quickly and kind of amazing. You don't even notice unless you have a problem. Then you really, really notice. But it's a system that works beautifully when it works and not so much when it doesn't. It's very disabling for people that have these kind of disorders that we'll talk about. Did you have a question? No. Anybody? Okay. So again, just some more pictures, just showing you, this is a blow up of this right here. You have the cupula, the cupula showing its different components. This is the receptor cells, those hair cells inside this membranous fluid. Okay, that's what it looks like here. So when motion happens, like rotation, this is the head rotating. The endolymph actually goes the other way, and it deflects this, which sets off the hair cells. Pretty freaking amazing system, right? And just another picture of what that motion in the semicircular canal does. So this is the beginning of rotation. So again, you get rotating of the endolymph, the endolymph stays behind, and this hair cells gets deflected. As things get going, then the endolymph catches up, and as you stop rotating, the endolymph keeps going. So that's how the hair cells more specifically detect the hair cell movement. Okay, so that's one side of the peripheral sensory organs. The other side is the otoliths. They work slightly different, and they're slightly different type of motion that they're detecting. So the otolith refers to the utricle and the saccule, and those are in different directions to pick up different motions. The utricle is in a horizontal, picks up horizontal acceleration, the saccule, the vertical acceleration. And so these organs detect linear acceleration and static head tilt. So what position you are statically, or if you're moving in a linear direction, versus the rotary movements of the semicircular canal. And the otolith organs are also sensitive to gravity. Another fascinating, amazing thing that our body has. So this is what the otolith looks like. So again, the macula, the gelatinous fluid that the hair cells are part of. The hair cells project into a substance called the otoconia. Okay, that's where the otoliths get their name. What does oto mean? Anybody? Right? And lip. Stone. So it's your stone in your ear. Okay? So this on top is a stone that the hair cells project into, and it responds to gravity, like any stone would, right? And so it lets you know when you tilt what direction it is. That's what allows it to respond to gravity. Yeah.
I had a physical therapist tell me that vertigo patients have like loose stones or something like that, so
Yep.
they shake them and try to get them. Is that the same thing?
Yep, that's the same thing. We'll be talking about that in a minute. He said a physical therapist had told him that the stones getting loose can cause vertigo, and that's exactly